Go then. Alright, that should be us live now. You had a problem with my video on the economic calculation problem. You thought that the thesis was wrong, that socialism is not impossible. So, do you want to just
Yes.
say what your counter argument is?
Yeah. I suppose I'll elaborate on my point a bit. First off, I just want to say that I'm not going to be arguing for the necessarily the good of socialism, nor its practicality, but simply that it is possible. I think that debate has more nuance to it, nuance that I will not be addressing in this particular debate. But my criticism stems from the assertion that you state that it is somehow fundamentally impossible just by the nature of the structure of a socialist government. And I'm not entirely sure the format that I'm going to address this with, but just going with the flow of the video, you begin by stating socialism is not good in theory, which is more of a subjective statement, not something I'm going to really address here, but you proceed to give a quote. The essential mark of socialism is that one will alone acts. It is immaterial whose will it is. The director might be an anointed king or dictator, ruling by virtue of his charisma. He may be a Führer or a board of Führers appointed by the vote of the people. The main thing is that the employment of all factors of production is directed by one agency, and only one will alone chooses, decides, directs, acts, and gives orders. The distinctive mark of socialism is the oneness and indivisibility of the world, directing all the production activities with the whole system. So I have a problem with this initially. Just the so-called will, or one will alone, that alone acts in a democratic social system is neither the will of one nor an alone action, but by its very definition, aggregate. It is a collective decision decided by the people for the people, and to assert that the process under such a system is the will of one and one alone neglects to acknowledge the fundamental principle of a system of democracy and refers to the singularity of any decision as the substantiative property that defines its oneness, rather than the procedure used to make the decision. So basically, decisions made under a democratic social system aren't not necessarily an individual decision. And I suppose, and correct me if I'm wrong, but it stems from a more central belief saying that there is no such thing as collective ownership. Is that something that I would be correct to assume that you believe to be true?
Well, yes, I do think there's no such thing as collective ownership, but that's kind of aside from the point of the economic calculation problem. Even if you have a democratic vote to decide what is to be done with the factors, that's still a single will, fundamentally. That single will is still doing all the choosing. Whether you come to that will via democratic vote, or whether it's a Führer or a king or whatever, it's still a single will acting. There, you don't have competing wills, each, trading factors and whatnot. And by the way, your voice is kind of robotic a little bit. Do you know, is there any, way you can fix that? Do you have, a VPN on or anything?
Give me a sec. Let me make sure it's... Sorry, give me a sec. Let me just check my audio settings, make sure that it's connected to the correct audio input. Sorry for the technical difficulties.
No worries.
Is it any better now?
No, but I mean, if that's just how it's going to be, then I'll just have to deal with it.
Yeah, apologies. I'm not entirely sure what's going on with it, but I suppose. Sorry. What was I going to say? Well, I suppose it depends on how you define an action as singular or collective. The action is decided by a democratic majority, which is not a flawless system, but it is still a collective decision, and it's a decision made by a group of people in agreement for one decision. So the decision itself is not singular or one in the sense of the process that comes to making the decision.
Right, but fundamentally, it's still going to be, we're trying to decide how to arrange the factors of production, rather than having a bunch of individual capitalists make this decision. We're just all going to vote on it. So that's still fundamentally a single will. It's not a bunch of individual capitalists each owning and directing some individual factors of production and choosing how to their placement as they wish. It's all being directed by a single agency. That agency's decision is made democratically, but that doesn't change the fundamental point.
So in what way is that not a functional system then?
The reason why it's not a functional system is because basically if you don't have any private direction of the factors of production, this means they can't be traded. But if they can't be traded, then there can be no factor prices. But if there are no factor prices, then economic calculation is impossible. And without economic calculation, lines of production are chosen in an arbitrary manner. That's the central thesis of the economic calculation problem.
So would it be correct to say that the supposed arbitrariness, the arbitrariness of the value of the factors of production is what makes them impossible to allocate in appropriate ways?
It's nothing to do with the arbitrariness of the value or anything like that. It's to do with the fact that you can't get any factor prices. You can't get any common unit of account for the factors of production. So that, because you can't trade them, right? And that means you can't do profit loss calculations. That's the fundamental problem.
So, although that is true, it does nothing to address the claim that a system void of private property and capital is congenitally incapable of evaluating the utility of factors of production. And it rather implies that profit is somehow synonymous with value, which is an inherently arbitrary concept defined by the principles of the system that it works is. Like the value of a ham sandwich in a capitalist society is not defined by its ability to provide sustenance, but rather by its ability to yield monetary gain or profit. And conversely, in a socialist society where the means of production are collectively owned and the basic necessities of life are provided by the state, meaning food, water, shelter, healthcare, etc., they no longer constitute value in the form of profit, but in the ability to sustain life or to suffice someone's hunger. And in the video, you use an analogy. Consider a man in a social society wants to build a railroad from city A to city B. There's a mountain in the way, and there are two alternatives for the process for the socialist or the collective socialist government to solve the problem. Either they can go around using more steel but less engineering might, or go through the mountain using less steel but more engineering might. And you question or question that, or you assert that there is an impossible decision to make based on the arbitrariness of the most efficient allocation of resources. Is it more valuable to use less steel and more engineering, or more steel and less engineering? And you address this by saying that, while this is not possible in a socialist society, a greedy capitalist who wants to build, quoting the video, greedy capitalist who wants to build from city C to city D is easily able to pick the most value productive route. He simply compares the prices of the two routes and picks the cheaper one. And not only does this benefit him in minimizing the costs, but in minimizing the costs, he actually frees up the rare bundle of resources for other people to use. And you say this is because on the market, prices are not arbitrarily slapped on them by the owner, rather they represent how much people want that item. And so I think here it's kind of conflating the ideas of demand and scarcity. And something can be in high demand and not a scarce commodity. And the inverse can also be true. Something can be in high commodity, but not necessarily desired. And in the process of determining the cheapest route as opposed to the, say, the safest or the most the fastest or the most effective or the most efficient use of resources, it's purely dependent on pricing. And additionally, for someone that is using an arbitrary system of financial values to determine or to maximize their own gain by building the railroad, they will also try to compromise on certain things in order to give them more of a profit. So they might cut corners in the integrity of the infrastructure. They may use less trusses to support a bridge building around the side of the mountain. And this isn't okay. I'm getting off topic. This isn't a criticism of capitalism. This to get back on topic of socialism. That's my bad. The problem that there is no way to determine the value or the most efficient way of using the resources could simply be solved by applying artificial values to the items based on their scarcity. If you have 1 million tons of steel and only 50 engineers, then anyone that needs steel, anyone that requests steel, or the government that wants to use steel for other services or utilities can assign a value relative to the amount that is available or the amount that is going to be produced, as opposed to having it be purely determined by how much people want something.
Right, but that doesn't actually solve the problem. Like you mentioned there, like, the capitalists, they're not necessarily getting the fastest, the safest, yada 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 route. But these things are all arbitrary, right? The capitalist is able to find the most value productive route because the most value productive route, by necessity, will be the route which makes him the most profit. That's like what the profit loss calculation does for him, right? So like this socialist entrepreneur just coming up with like, okay, we have like 16 tons of lumber and 17 tons of steel, right? So you have a common unit between them, the amount of tons there are, but that's not relevant to human action because humans don't act upon actual physical units. We act upon subjective units. We act upon economic units, right? That's the fundamental thing at play here. And you can't get that from just having this engineer brain of like, oh, well, titanium is a better metal than aluminium. It has all these superior chemical properties, so we should build all of our cars out of titanium rather than aluminium. And it's like, well, yes, it might be the case that it has all these superior chemical properties, but, titanium is needed for all these other things, right? It's needed for aviation and stuff like this. So on the market, the price of titanium gets bid up. Like, it's not just, as you yourself mentioned, it's not just about how scarce a resource is. It's not just about how rare that resource is. It's also about how much we want these different resources. And you can't make a non-arbitrary decision based upon, no matter how much information you gather. You can't make a non-arbitrary decision between line A, production line A, and production line B unless you have factor prices. Like this, let's just go back to the argument I gave above. We've got premise 1. Without private property in the factors of production, they cannot be traded. Premise 2. If the factors cannot be traded, there can be no factor prices. Premise 3. If there are no factor prices, economic calculation is impossible. And the conclusion is, without economic, or, you could even say that 3 is the conclusion, just if we're going to have it as like a strict syllogism. And, the effect of what it means for economic calculation is impossible is that lines of production are arbitrarily chosen. So 1, without private property, without private direction of the factors, they can't be traded. If the factors can't be traded, then there can be no factor prices. Conclusion, without factor prices, economic calculation is impossible. Do you have any issue with any line of that syllogism? I can send it to you in text if you want.
Yeah, that would be helpful. I think my primary contention is just with the association with profit being the almighty deciding factor when it comes to the best use of resources. And you say that it would require a tremendous. No, you say no matter the amount of knowledge gathered about particular resources, it is impossible to decide what is the best use. And I don't see how that is necessarily true. If in a socialist society where the government is providing these necessities to the people, they will go through a process of deciding what is the most effective use of the resources. If they need titanium for the planes and they can use a material that is comparably effective at giving structural integrity to the bridge or to the tracks or whatever, then they will use that resource because it is better suited for the particular thing they need, freeing up the titanium for a separate thing. And the values assigned to these things don't even necessarily mean that it is the best thing to use. But by basing the utilization of materials off of their practical application and the scarcity of them, not actually the value that or the demand that people want of them, then you eliminate the degree of arbitrariness that comes with it, because you are evaluating the utility of resources based on their practical application as opposed to the demand that people have for them.
Right, so you said there that the government goes through a process of deciding the best uses of resources, but what exactly is that process? Because the only process I can see to do that would be economic calculation. You do some profit loss calculation. That's a non-arbitrary process, I would agree there, if they could somehow do that. But what is the alternative process? Right, what is the alternative non-arbitrary decision-making process for deciding which line of production to use? Because you could go through all sorts of chemical formulae and physical properties of these different lines of production, but none of this is going to give you a non-arbitrary decision. You're still ultimately going to have to make some decision. So how do they make that decision?
Scarcity demand calculation.
Okay.
If you're not using the economic if you're not evaluating the value of them based on their place in the economy, then you evaluate them based on their scarcity. And by having effectively having all of the resources at their disposal, the people that they would need to make these decisions, the people that know what the most effective resource is to use for any given activity, simply by calling upon them to assist in the decision-making process, then you subvert the problem with the economic loss calculation.
So what does it look like to perform a scarcity demand calculation? Because I've never heard of such a thing. So what would it look like for me to go through a scarcity demand calculation if I'm the socialist central planner?
Let me think. So let's say that the government wants to build a medical facility, and they also want to build a railway. Considering both the scarcity and need, higher value, and more scarcity, more value, the allocation of the resources can be determined by the amount that are available and the relative need that each project, or sorry, let me rephrase. The basically, which project needs a material more? An airplane needs stronger, lighter materials more than a hospital needs stronger, lighter materials. The hospital will be just fine with concrete or wood or any number of other building resources. But the plane needs the titanium. And it is in the best interest of the government to allocate these resources in the most effective way. And to assert that that is impossible simply because there is no value attributed by a market depending on supply and demand, I don't think makes a lot of sense.
Okay, how do we know that we shouldn't make planes out of, like, carbon fiber composites? Like, 'cause, you know, Elon Musk is testing this stuff out on his, like, rocket ships, you know? So it's clear that, like, there are aerial vehicles which can be made by these super, super duper fancy carbon fiber materials. So how do we know that we shouldn't use those for the planes? And, you know, why shouldn't we use them for MRI machines? Why shouldn't we use them for everything? How do we find this out?
Do airplanes work, generally speaking, with the stuff that we use for them now?
Yep. But they would also work with wood. Like, we've made airplanes out of wood before.
But that's not as durable material, and it would cry.
Yep. It's also, but the materials we're currently using aren't as durable as the materials which are available. So how do we find out which level of durability we should be going for?
I mean, that's as arbitrary of a decision as
I agree, it's arbitrary.
But but just because it's arbitrary doesn't make it impossible to make.
What the specific meaning of impossible with respect to a socialist economy is that you're not economizing, right? It's not an economy in that sense. You can have a socialist society, right? You can have some society where all of the factors are run by a single will, where a single will is directing all the factors. That's perfectly possible. Nobody disputes this. What's impossible is the economic calculation. This society would not be able to economize these resources. It would not be able to find the most value productive uses of different factors of production. It's not possible. And this goes back to the syllogism I gave. Premise one, without private property in the factors, they can't be traded. If the factors can't be traded, there are no factor prices. Conclusion, without factor prices, economic calculation is impossible. So under socialism, it's not possible to have economic calculation. Right? This is the fundamental problem here. It's simply not possible. It can't be done. Whatever line of production you're choosing, it's going to be arbitrary. You could choose different lines of production, and you don't know which one is best.
So I think it's fair to say that the objective most efficient use of any resources is not something that is feasible to achieve in any system of government. There will always be a degree of error, either in a capitalist market supply and demand or the collective decision making of a socialist society. But the fact that it does not work at peak efficiency also does not mean that it is inherently impossible. There are plenty more. There are plenty of more efficient uses of resources that we could be doing right now, that America could be doing right now as a country to conserve certain things in favor of other things. But it doesn't mean that it doesn't function, period. Just because things aren't working as smoothly as they could be doesn't mean that they don't work at all.
Right, but
economic calculation is
fundamentally the thing with the market is, it isn't always on the dime of the most efficient usage of factors of production that it could always be at. Malinvestment does happen, but what happens in a market is the entrepreneur can see this. They can see that they're making a mistake with their arrangement of the factors. They can see that they're making a loss. That's like, okay, something's wrong here. For the socialist central planner, they don't get this signal, right? So the market naturally tends towards the most efficient use. Socialism doesn't and can't, right? Because the socialist central planner never receives any signals as to when he's making a misallocation, because he doesn't make any losses given this, right?
So do losses necessarily constitute an inefficient use of resources?
Yes.
Because in a capitalist society, the goal is to make a profit, not to use resources most efficiently. And it's fair to say that more efficient use of resources can end up increasing profit, but that's also not necessarily true, because demand is, again, arbitrary. And
right, what people want is arbitrary. Like, okay, right, in any system, no matter what people want, what people value is arbitrary, it is subjective, right? That is just what people want, right? The question of economics isn't really, okay, what is it that people should be wanting? That's like an ethics question, right? So in whatever economic system you might want to come up with, whether it be capitalism or socialism or something else, right? The question is, how are you going to achieve what people want, right? Because it is surmountable to figure out what it is people want. It's almost impossible. Like, it's the, quote unquote easy question of what it is people want, right? That's the knowledge problem. It's almost completely insurmountable, but it's not technically impossible to figure that out, right? So that is not impossible. What is impossible is, given what people want, you have a big list of what everybody wants. How do you produce it, right? That's what the factors of production are there for, right? The factors produce consumers' goods. So we know what consumers' goods we want to produce, but how should we go about producing them, right? How do we know that a given line of production we've chosen is inefficient or not? The answer in the capitalist society is that if it's inefficient, you are using resources which could be better used elsewhere, which are being bid up, right, by other people who want them more. And that's what makes you make a loss, right? If you're making a loss, you know that you're using resources in a way which is less effective, less value productive than other people could have been using those resources. You get that signal, and naturally, you end up falling out of being an entrepreneur. If you're a bad entrepreneur and you keep making these bad decisions about how capital should be arranged, then you're not going to have any money to be an entrepreneur anymore, right? So we have this sort of Darwinian system where only the best entrepreneurs, only those entrepreneurs who are best able to arrange capital, will continue to be entrepreneurs, right? It's magical.
But it doesn't work flawlessly.
Of course it doesn't. Like, malinvestment does exist, right? I don't deny that, right? That is such a thing. But the fundamental point is the market tends towards the best arrangement of resources. The socialist society does not. It can't tend towards this. It's just completely arbitrary throughout.
But the arbitrariness of the capitalist system is based on how much people want something, which is, how does that arbitrariness outweigh the arbitrariness of a socialist economy?
Well, no matter which system we're considering, if we're being economists, right, you are taking what people want as a given, right? We're just assuming that we know whatever people want. How they came to this is irrelevant, right? The question is, how do we produce those things? If you're producing them in some arbitrary manner, then that means you're not tending towards the most efficient way to produce those things, right? That's what it means to be arbitrary in terms of lines of production.
So, can I present a scenario quickly? Let's say that the government wants to build a railway, and having collective ownership of the means of production and the things that would produce the materials necessary to build the railway, the people vote and decide on what they need to build the railway. They set up an ideal, they lay out the plans for what would be considered an ideal and not exorbitantly demanding set of plans for a railway to be built. And then you request the means of production to give you those resources. You tell to this factory, make me 1,000 miles worth of steel for rails, and you say to this engineering coalition or firm, I need 100 engineers to help me make sure that this process goes smoothly.
Okay, but how does this solve the problem? Like, yeah, you know what factors of production you have, and you know what people want. The question is how to arrange those factors. Like, yeah, the people can vote on it, but what the fuck do the people know? Right? It's have you ever heard the saying, a camel is a horse designed by committee? Right? What the fuck do the people know? The people aren't entrepreneurs, right? If that was the case, then if you start up an investment firm today and just have everybody on the internet vote on which investments you should invest in, and you'll become a billionaire tomorrow. If the people are such great entrepreneurs in their collective will, then do that and you'll become a billionaire. Right? But that's clearly not how it's going to work.
The same logic applies to capitalism. What the fuck do people know?
No, it doesn't. But fundamentally,
people don't know.
Under capitalism, there's a Darwinian system where only those best entrepreneurs, only those people who are very good at deciding the optimal arrangement of capital will survive. Only those guys are going to survive. Because everybody else is going to lose money. And they're going to leave the game.
But again, in a socialist government, money isn't the deciding factor. The people that
that's a problem. That's not a benefit. That's a bug, not a feature.
The people that are going to be making the decisions had to get there by proving their aptitude to serve those purposes.
How did they prove their aptitude?
If you want engineers, the engineers go to school for engineering and they graduate with a degree.
We want entrepreneurs. So how do we find entrepreneurs in a socialist society where entrepreneurship is essentially banned?
Entrepreneurship is not banned in a socialist society. Innovation is simply encouraged via other means.
How? Which means?
So, capitalists live under the impression that the only reason anyone would ever do something innovative.
No. I don't care about, we can assume the new socialist man who has incentives to do everything they want. Right? That's the thing with Mises' economic calculation problem. He says, okay, we have the new socialist man who will want to do whatever it is. The socialist society is run by angels who just want the best for everybody. Everybody's super motivated to do whatever work is necessary. Still, you can't have economic calculation. Right? That's why it's the economic calculation problem. It's not the incentive problem. It's not the problem of how will we get people to do things. It's the problem of how do we just choose the lines of production.
People who study the ideal allocation of resources.
Okay, how do they study it? What is day one of ideal allocation of resources 101? What does that look like? Okay, we have line A and line B. We've got these two railroads. Line A goes through the mountain, line B goes around the mountain. How do we determine which one is best?
So there have been computer science simulations, or I'm going to find, there's a particular paper published by a college that simulated scenarios and in which the most effective allocation of resources can be determined. There are people that will learn how to...
I've seen certain simulations of supposedly solving the economy and things like this, and every single one I've seen, they've made horrible assumptions. Right, they have done things like equating value with money. They've done things like, just completely throwing out marginalism and subjective value. They've done things where, everybody knows, everything. They've done all sorts of horrible assumptions in their simulation. We don't need any simulations, though, is the thing. Because we have the economic theory here. We have the general economic principles at play, which I gave you in the syllogism. Right? Do you disagree with any step of the syllogism?
Let me take another look at it. I mean, It's true, but it doesn't mean that the economic calculation is the only way to determine values. This is all working within the idea of a capitalist society. This is a capitalist society abides by these rules. If we were to try to have a capitalist society without private property, then you are completely right. The system
what is a capitalist society without private directional factors? Well, that's what a socialist society is, and it doesn't work apparently.
Well, there have been societies other than capitalist and socialist. The feudalist societies of
There's going to be some way between those two extremes, right? Because those are the two extremes. If you have some socialism, then you're going to have some issues with the ECP. If you have a complete socialism, then you're going to have complete problems with the ECP. Like, this is what happened with the USSR. Like, it survived for 70 years or something. The only reason it was able to survive for even such a short time was because it copied prices from the capitalist part of the world, right? But you can indeed have slight socialism, like every country ever, right? Because we haven't achieved anarcho-capitalism yet, right? So if you have slight socialism, then you're gonna have slight calculational chaos, you know?
In your video, you talk about how in the Soviet Union there were errors in the process of allocating resources. The factors of production were given a certain amount of clothes needed to produce.
Yeah, the gross output planning.
And you say that it doesn't work simply because they were given the amount of clothes, the amount of clothes needed in yards of cloth as opposed to actual sizes of clothing. The gross output planning could very easily be fixed by more specific instructions.
No. The fundamental issue isn't that the instructions weren't specific enough. It's that if there's any change in market conditions, the planners couldn't know this, so they wouldn't be able to change the instructions. Right? So it might seem reasonable to an engineer to be like, okay, so we want a bunch of clothes, so let's do yards of cloth. But then, women and children, they aren't able to get clothes in their size. It's like, if that would happen in a market, then suddenly the price of children's clothing and women's clothing would shoot up. Right? So then people would start running into those lines of production. They'd be like, okay, we got to produce these things because there's profits to be made. Right? That's the fundamental issue with the socialist central planners, is they can't set proper goals. They're not able to because they don't have feedback. They don't have any feedback when they're making mistakes.
But the feedback can come from the people, very, very simply. Where the factors of production are collectively owned, if women and children don't have enough clothing, they just say, hey, can we make some more clothing? And then they make some more clothing for them. The system that works with capitalism, there is an implicit planning to decide whether or not something needs to be made more of. It isn't directly being stated. Again, it's all depending on the idea of profit. If prices go up, we need to make more of something so that more people can have it. But the socialist economy completely skips that step and just says, we need more clothing, so let's make more clothing.
Right, okay. So we know that we want more clothing. We know that we want all these different things. We know we want railroads. We know we want schools. We want clothing. We want shoes. All these different things. But fundamentally, how do we produce these things? Which lines of production do we choose? It's unanswerable to the socialist. They can't answer it.
How do you make clothes?
Yeah, because there are all sorts of different ways you can make clothes. Right? There are all sorts of different ways you can make planes. There are all sorts of different ways you can make these different things. So how do we choose the best method to make them?
So we could, in theory, use carbon fiber to make every single piece of clothing that every person ever wears. But that wouldn't be an efficient use of resources.
Yeah, and do you know how we know this? Because it'd be super fucking expensive. It would cost like a fucking $1 billion for a shirt. That's how we know it'd be super inefficient. How does the socialist find this out?
Because carbon fiber has more value elsewhere. Value that is not constituted by price.
Okay, how do they decide between cotton and polyester? Two far more similar factors, right? How do they decide between those two?
Does it really matter which of the two they
Oh,
choose?
it definitely matters. Right, because the fundamental point is they'd have to make an arbitrary choice. Whereas the capitalist is able to decide, like, the exact ratios of cotton and polyester in their different clothing. Right, because they can make the perfect fabric for their perfect line of production that they need to do. And you see this, like the trousers I just bought recently, in fact. It's like a super, you look on it, and it's a super precise different mix of different fabrics. Like, go on to like any shirt in your closet or whatever. Look at the fabrics they use. It's super precise, the different ratios they use. How could a socialist ever discover this? Right, they couldn't.
The same way that capitalists discover it.
So they do profit-loss calculations. They discover it in the same way. They do profit-loss calculations. Because that's how the capitalists did it.
The capitalist, or I should say, the person that discovered the blend of the shirt that is comfortable did not.
It's not just comfortable, right? Because there are definitely like more comfortable clothing out there. There's also price, right? There's also a price consideration there. Like, I wouldn't doubt that if I was wearing a shirt made of pure silk, it would be more comfortable. Like, it probably would be more comfortable if I was wearing a shirt made of pure silk. But that'd be super fucking pricey.
So then what is stopping people from simply assigning values to things relative to their scarcity?
Yes, so we need some way for people to communicate their values for different things. Given their scarcity, we could have like some sort of tokens they use to, get these things. So they could like assign a certain number of tokens to a certain thing that they want to get, another amount of tokens to a different thing. We could call these tokens like a money or something like that. And then that would actually solve the problem. If we had these tokens and everybody uses them to trade different things, and oh, wait a minute, that's what the capitalist society does.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but does socialism abolish capital, or does it abolish money?
It abolishes private direction of the factors of production. So yeah, you could have trading of the consumer's goods, but not of capital goods. Right? There are no factor prices in socialism.
Well, because they don't need capital goods. Capital goods are...
Of course we need capital goods. What are you on about?
More money.
We definitely need capital goods. We don't get consumer's goods without capital goods. Unless you're just Robinson Crusoe going and plucking a berry straight from a fucking bush. Right? You need capital goods. You need a stick to push the coconuts off the tree.
Capital goods are defined by their ability to make money, make profit.
No. Capital goods are defined by their ability to make consumers' goods, right? So you have different orders of capital goods. So first order capital goods are immediately after the consumer's goods. So let's say I am getting a raw fish from the ocean and I'm cooking it to get some cooked fish. So a capital good would be a fishing rod, which I use to get another capital good of raw fish, which I combine with a different capital good of a hot frying pan, which I use to make the consumer's good of a cooked fish. Right? So there are different orders of capital goods. Like fifth order capital goods are used to make fourth order capital goods, and so on until we get down to the consumer's good.
And why is that not possible?
You don't have any, under socialism, you don't have any trading of these capital goods. So you don't have any prices on these factors. So you can't determine their most value productive arrangement.
Why don't you have that?
Well, because without private direction of factors, they can't be traded. Right? To trade something, you need to be able to privately direct it. Why do you agree with that step? To trade something, you need to privately direct its use. You need to be able to control it.
The control is collective.
Okay, yes, but I'm talking about individual control. If a single will controls all factors, it's not trading with itself, is it? There's no trading going on.
I mean, what's stopping it from, quote-unquote, trading with itself? Again,
that's not trading. That's not trading. It's children playing market. It's not actual market going on.
Well, it doesn't need to be a market.
It does actually need to be a market, because it actually needs to be traded. So if it's not actually traded, you're not actually getting prices. You're not getting actual prices. You're getting fake children playing market prices. It's arbitrary. It's still arbitrary unless you have an actual market.
But if the prices can be used to effectively allocate resources,
They
then
need to be
have
actual
value.
prices. They need to be real prices. They need to reflect real conditions. That can only happen with real trading, not fake trading. Not directing some people on a stage in a play to trade some things. Right? I could direct Alice and John to trade some things, and it's in the script that they trade them for different prices, but that's not reflecting actual conditions of the market. It's not reflecting their actual wants.
So in a socialist government, there will be different departments that are responsible for different things. I mean, who am I to say? I don't know how a socialist government would look,
we could have a bunch of different departments. We could have a department called Walmart, a department called Amazon, a department called fucking Starbucks. We could have all these different departments, and they could trade with each other, and then that would definitely solve it.
I'm going to finish what I was going to say. The internal departments can collect the internal departments working within the government system with the collective goal of just using resources most efficiently, can express their necessity for resources based on a imaginary system of value assigned by their relative scarcity. The internal departments can act like a market.
Okay, right. First of all, at best, under the system, they just be approaching a market, but then, what's the point of having this whole thing? But, second point, how could they act like a market without any of the prices? Because the only way the capitalists were able to do this is by doing profit loss calculations. How could the socialists emulate this without profit loss calculations?
They would. Well, you called it play money, and in a way, that's exactly what it is. But the play money. So
they just arbitrarily come up with it. They just say steel is 17 Google gobs, and wood is 16 Google gobs.
The play money is emulating the play money.
How is it emulating?
The unit values is emulating the relative scarcity.
How?
Or it's emulating the demands of any given resource.
How?
Because it's based on the scarcity and the need.
How? How is it based on it?
Because the different departments, the different divisions of the government express via diplomacy, very simply, what they need something for and how badly they need it. Sorry, give me 1 second. Sorry, I'm back.
No worries.
Hello?
Yeah, I'm here.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, sorry.
So the different departments are expressing what they want, right? But, if we take this to the reductio case, then, we have a bunch of different departments. One of them is called Starbucks, one of them is called Discord, one of them is called Walmart, one of them is called fucking Twitter. All these different departments, each expressing what they want by trying to bid for different resources with a token we call money, right? And that solves it.
Yeah, to an extent, you could say that sure. I mean, that is essentially what a socialist government is. It is nationalizing all of these independent departments. So I don't really see what your point is.
But then it relies on capitalism. Like, it is not achieving its fundamental goal of abolishing private direction of the factors.
A department could say, I would be willing, hypothetically, even though we don't really have any way to... They don't have any actual money to give to pay for something, but they say, we would pay this amount of money to get this amount of this arbitrary unit. We would pay this amount of this unit to get this resource. And then the different departments have the different amount of this depending on the necessity for the resource to determine who needs a particular thing more. And then there's just an element of logic to it. Like no department of clothing manufacturing is going to say, we really need carbon fiber for our clothing. It is a necessity that we need this. No car manufacturer is going to say it is an absolute necessity that we build everything out of titanium. They're going to recognize the fact that it may have better values elsewhere because the collective benefits from making more efficient decisions, and then they're going to ask for a resource that would better suit the needs of the operation that they're trying to fulfill.
Okay, so you said they're like, the departments would say like, oh, I'd be willing to pay this amount of money for this thing. But like, why wouldn't I just say, oh, I run the textiles industry, so I'd be willing to pay infinity money for some of these new carbon fiber textiles, because I think they're great, So I pay infinity money because my skin isn't in the game.
It's not sustainable.
How would I know that?
People,
right? Because that leads into the other thing you said, where it's like, well, they'll recognize that, like, the car industry will recognize that these carbon fiber composites have better uses elsewhere. Right? But how would they recognize that? Because they have no feedback. If they make a wrong decision, if they choose titanium rather than aluminium, they have no feedback to show them that was the wrong decision. They have none of this, so they just be making arbitrary decisions. They may be making arbitrary choices.
They're shown the fact, they're shown the faultiness of the decision by the fact that another department that needed that more is not able to produce what they needed to make.
Okay, so another department, but how you determine that another department needed that more was that they also said, hey, I'd probably be willing to pay this amount of money for it, but I'm not actually paying for it. So I'd probably be, I'm coming up with a number off the top of my head. I'd be willing to pay infinity dollars, and I say I'd be willing to pay infinity plus $1. So I get it, and it's like, how does that show me anything?
But again, the benefit of all depends on the cooperation. They have no incentive to say,
how can that's the fundamental point is, how can they cooperate on this? It's not plausible. How can they figure out that they made the wrong decision?
Because I just said, if something else needed, if microchip manufacturing needs carbon fiber or gold or a precious metal, it needs it. It doesn't just want it. It needs it for it to function properly.
And how do you figure out how much of that you need? How do you figure out how much microchip manufacture you need?
I mean, it depends on what the microchips are being made for. What is the government, or what are the people deciding they want or they need to produce with the microchips?
Right, it's all arbitrary.
Yeah, that doesn't mean that it's wrong.
It's arbitrary. They couldn't tend towards the correct arrangement. That's the fundamental point.
We established that we've established already that the concepts of supply and demand are also arbitrary. The value of things is arbitrary.
A microchip is not a consumer's good, right? A consumer's good would be something like a computer, right? Whether you're actually consuming the computer. A microchip is not that. A microchip is another factor of production. So how do you figure out how many microchips you want? And how do you figure out which microchip you want? Because there are definitely cheaper microchips out there.
It all, in the end, works to serve the people. It may not serve them directly.
How does it serve people? How do you work that out? Because you can't figure out when you made a mistake.
But you can.
Okay, let's return to the syllogism then. Without private direction of factors, they can't be traded. If the factors can't be traded, there are no factor prices. If there are no factor prices, economic calculation is impossible.
The factors don't need to be traded. In fact, an economic calculation is not necessary.
Okay, so an economic calculation is not necessary. So what is the other method you're choosing?
That's what I've just been describing this entire time.
You've not succeeded.
I mean, like, forgive me for not knowing the specifics of a hypothetical socialist government and how it would function, but there would be a process. People would again,
That's what you say. You keep
People
saying
would
there would be a
specialize in these
process.
things.
The government would go through a process, but you're not actually explaining the process. That's what I'm going for, right? Because I don't think there would be a process. I don't think there would be a
Okay, all right.
process. I think that process is impossible.
Specialists and voters, in general, you could say the people will do based on their knowledge and their skills in different, I'm not going to say industries, or just in different fields of action or whatever, based on the skills and their knowledge, they can determine what they need and what they in how to use them best.
How do they determine how to use them best? That's the point I don't get. You say they can determine this, but how?
People study these things.
Well, what do they study? How do they study that? Right? Because imagine if I was coming in here and saying, well, I want a system where we make it such that red is both red and non-red. And then you said, well, how on earth would that happen? And I say, well, people would study these things. You know, people study how to make contradictions true. They'll study it and they'll work it out. Right? How do they actually do this is the question.
I don't think that's a fair analogy to make, because it is objectively impossible for something to be both red and non-red.
I agree.
So I don't think that's a fair.
That's why I think it's a fair analogy. Because I don't think it's possible for you to study this mysterious process where you determine the best line of production aside from factor prices. I think it's impossible. I don't see how it could be done. Please enlighten me. What is this mysterious process other than profit-loss calculations? Because those are pretty simple. I can see how a profit-loss calculation works. So how does your mysterious process work?
Well, coming up on the spot, it's difficult, as I'm sure you can understand. But I have reason to believe the process would go along the lines of there's a finite amount of this resource, and there are multiple groups that want this resource or could use this resource, not necessarily need, but could use it. In collaboration, the people that would be using the resource, the people that would be allocating the resource, the anticipated results of using the resource in any specific industry or in any specific application, etc., are all considered in conjunction and then decided what would be the best use of those resources. It takes into account the best course of action in admittedly hypothetical situations, but people will be doing the best they can to the best of their knowledge, to their ability, getting the people that know what they're talking about to decide where to best put these resources. It takes into consideration the possible outcomes of giving the car manufacturer titanium versus the airplane manufacturer titanium. And it says, well, the car manufacturers don't really need this more. And the engineers will say, yeah, we don't really need it. And then the airplane manufacturers will say, but we do, because we want our planes to last a long time and we want the passengers to be safe, etc. And this process, it doesn't even need to be this complicated. But, just on a whim, I suppose that's how it could work. And there could be a more regimented structure to the process in order to account for human error and like the anticipated subjectivity of some people's necessity of resources. But given the fact that the collective good or the collective benefit depends on cooperation, people have no reason to not be reasonable with what they're doing. And I don't see that as an impossible. I don't think that is an impossibility. Maybe it's difficult. We've never really. I mean, in a way, kind of, not really. It was seen with the Soviet Union or in other like state planned economies, but those were flawed inherently. but they were also not the best systems operating on the principles of socialism. The Soviet Union was incredibly flawed, and in essence, not entirely communist, just run by a communist party. And
All right. Hold that thought. I'm going to go to the toilet real quick.
Actually, all right. Yeah, no problem. Again, the incentive is to make the most money and not. Oh,
all right. Yeah, I'm back.
Yeah. All right.
So do you want me to respond?
Yeah. You go ahead.
Sure. So what you gave there was basically like, well, when you have all of these people in collaboration who are using the resources, they're doing the lines of production, they're doing all of this stuff, you know, you have all these opinions in conjunction, and then somehow you decide what the best use would be. And an example you gave was, well, the car manufacturers say, oh, we don't really need titanium. And the plane manufacturers say, well, we do really need it. Right, but what if people aren't? What if it isn't like that? What if the rocket manufacturers say, well, we really need titanium? And the plane manufacturers say, well, we also really need it. How do you resolve this dispute? Is the question, right?
The same way that we resolve disputes normally. Democracy.
Okay, so you just have everybody vote on it, right? So then the car manufacturers say, we really need carbon fiber composites, and it'll make cars so much better. And then everybody just votes on it, and you get a committee car. And you get a committee everything. Right? But this is not resolving the issue. Right? It's still going to be entirely arbitrary. Because the massive democracy is not some entrepreneur. Right? They're not going to make good decisions.
But this is a better system than what we have currently, which
no, it's not. It's a worse system.
By corporation. No. The system that we have now involves lobbying by corporations whose incentive is to make money. So
that's
the
good.
Decisions is not,
that's a feature, not a bug.
That's good. Lobbying is good.
No, it's a feature, not a bug. That we have people looking for profit. That's a good thing, right? If you have just democratic votes on everything, if you have it just where we have complete socialism, where whatever lines of production we're choosing, just we'll have the people vote on it randomly, you know, that is not achieving the most value productive use. Because the people are not entrepreneurs. They don't know which use is going to be more efficient. And they can't know this. They can't get any feedback on if their previous decisions were wrong. They can't do any of these things. There is no economic calculation.
Is the value something, would you say, adjacent to like how much someone wants something?
So value. So what a value in terms of economics would be, if I want to go to a baseball game, I want to drive my car around, and I want to drink beer. You know, these are the three things I want to do right now. And I value going to the baseball game highest. I value going for a drive around second highest, and drinking a beer third highest. So my value would be like first for the baseball game, second for going on a drive around, third for drinking a beer. Right? It's the ranking of the ends I want to achieve.
Can I pause you just for 1 second?
Sure.
My friend just messaged me watching this. I want to try to figure out what my mic problem is because I just want to. I don't know what my. Let me join your stream super quick because I don't know what my mic sounds like.
It doesn't sound like the mic itself is low quality. It sounds like it's lagging. Like, you know, you've got like a bad internet or something. We could try going onto the server and like reducing the bitrate or something.
Okay, I hear what it sounds like. That is. Let me just try unplugging and plugging it back in. Let's see. Hello?
Yeah, I hear you. It's still going on. Like, I think it's an internet problem. I don't think your mic itself is bad.
For some reason.
Like, I think it's a problem with, like...
I should have... I can hear what you're saying, but I should have taken care of this in advance.
Yeah.
I
Okay.
can hear now. Is my mic any better?
No. It's still going on. Like, I think it's I don't think it's a problem with the microphone itself. I think it's a problem with like bitrate. Like you know, like that's why I was suggesting going onto my server, and like, because when it's in a voice channel on a server, I could fuck around with the bitrate, like store the bitrate way down, and hopefully that will improve it.
So, do you want to join a channel server then?
Yeah, hold on. Let's just go into the debate channel, and I will give you the role where you can speak there, and you'll have to leave and join again.
Okay.
All right, hold on. I'm giving you the role. All right, leave the channel and join again. Yellow.
Hello.
All right, now I'm gonna try and throw the bitrate just way down.
All right.
All right, let's see if that works.
Is it any better now?
Not particularly.
Now you just sound like you're talking through a Nokia.
Yeah. So that did not work.
Yeah, I'm really sorry that this is fucking happening. I don't know what the problem is. I'm gonna try just restarting Discord super quick, and if it doesn't work, then we'll just move on.
Alrighty.
Hello?
Hi there.
Is it any better now?
No, it's still going on.
All right. I think it has something to do with Discord, because I just did a voice recording and it sounded fine. So I don't know what's going on. But anyway, sorry. Where were we?
Something about basically when you have these like social systems where they're trying to plan, you vote on everything. You vote on, okay, we're going to line up production A over the line of production B. All these things. Like, the problem is that the people voting on these things, they don't have any feedback. They don't have any way of knowing whether they're making the right decision or the wrong decision. They have none of this. Right? They're just making a completely arbitrary choice.
Well, they're making a decision based on what they think is best. And I also disagree with the sentiment that in every instance they will not be able, like the people will not be able to see the results of it. Like if they're voting on whether or not to, allocate the titanium to train or to planes or to cars or to whatever, that's stuff that they will actively experience. And if their decision actively improves something else, then they will experience that benefit. Would they not? And also, I also want to ask, do you acknowledge the fact that in at least some instances in a capitalist, what we have now, or either in an anarcho-capitalist society, people will not always make the best decision, but the most profitable decision?
Sure, a lot of times people will make, they'll malinvest. But the point is that they will see this.
That's not what I mean. I mean, like, they will cut corners. They won't be as sure, or they won't build as many trusses on a bridge as an engineer recommends because it's cheaper.
Well, I think cutting corners is good, right? I don't see a problem with cutting corners.
I think a lot of people would. I think East Palestine would disagree.
Okay.
Uh,
I will allow them to disagree then, because you have them send an argument my way, you know?
so cutting corners. How is cutting corners good?
Because it gets you the product for cheaper. Right. What this means is that you are going for the line of production which is less desired by other people. You're going for the most efficient line of production. I have a video on this about planned obsolescence. Right. So if you are producing cheap trousers which degrade really quickly, some people might not care about if their trousers last for tens of years. Some people only want their trousers to last for a weekend, so they don't care if it lasts that long, right? So this is a good thing to cut corners here, because everybody wins.
Well, people don't care, and also some people do. And my
Okay, so then people can buy products which haven't had the corners cut, right? There's the freedom in capitalism. You can buy those products which you actually want. You can buy cut corner products, or you can buy non-cut corner products.
But cutting corners can actively hurt people, and it has actively hurt people.
Right? It's bad when it hurts people, but not when it doesn't.
Well, you could say that cutting corners when it doesn't hurt people is just an improvement. It's discovering a more efficient way to do something. So I think there's a difference between cutting corners and discovering a more efficient way to do something.
So then what does it mean to cut corners?
Let's say that, let's say you're building a railway. You can use titanium, or you can solid titanium, or you can use hollow titanium. Hollow titanium is cheaper, but it's not as stable. So there's the possibility that it will break. So you can cut that corner and use the hollow titanium to make cheaper rails that don't work as well. An innovation or an improvement in efficiency that also cuts cost would be using a titanium and steel alloy that has relatively the same strength as pure titanium, but it's also cheaper. The difference is that it's not as cheap as just using hollow titanium or even hollow steel, and people suffer for it.
Maybe hollow titanium is the best choice, because, you know, we don't build railroads of an arbitrary strength. You know, we don't build them with the strongest materials we have. We don't build diamond railroads. So there's clearly a level of strength that they need to achieve. And maybe hollow titanium is enough to achieve that level of strength.
But in this instance, I'm saying that it isn't.
Okay, well, if it's not, then this guy is going to go out of fucking business. So he made a bad choice.
But not necessarily.
If he stays in business, then it was fine, right? He was choosing the correct option.
Or people don't hear about the failure, or there's no other option for a service.
If there's no other option, if I have no other option to, like, get down to Edinburgh, like, you know, I need to get down to Edinburgh in a day. Like, I live up in Aberdeen. I need to get down there in a day. You know, I have no options other than this hollow titanium railroad. Then thank fuck this guy made that railroad. You know, maybe he wouldn't have made it if he had to make it to the government fucking specified standards of having complete titanium bricks or whatever. You know, thank fuck he violated those standards and got that railroad down because nobody else was willing to. Right? Thank fuck he did that, because now I can get down there.
And what if the railroad collapses because the weight is too much to bear?
Then, yeah, that's bad. Dead. It's bad, right? That's bad that happens. What do you want from me?
They could have made a safer investment.
It's always the case that they could have made a better railroad, right? You know, we could have made diamond encrusted fucking planes. You know, we could have made fucking all sorts of we could have used all these super expensive carbon fiber composite materials to make our trains out of. You know, we can do all these things. Doesn't mean it's the best option. If you're making a railroad and it's actually unsafe, like it's actually a bad railroad, to the point where if you ride on it, then you're likely to die, and it's not advertised as such. Like, it's advertised as being like, no, you'll get to your journey, you'll get to your destination fine. Don't worry about it. This is a perfectly safe railroad. Then they're doing fraud right there,
Yeah.
But that's the thing. Just making a shitty quality railroad isn't a crime. Making a shitty quality railroad and pretending that it's high quality and selling people that it's high quality, that's a crime, because you're doing fraud there.
And that happens.
Yeah, and that's bad. It's a crime.
So, do you agree when I say that cutting corners can be bad?
It's only bad if you lie about it. It's only bad when you are pretending that you're not cutting those corners. If you're open about cutting corners, then it's completely fucking fine.
I guess to an extent that's a fair statement to make. But then there's there can be the fact that sometimes people don't have any other options than to use.
Then thank fuck those guys gave those options that they do have. Right, if I have no other options than this hollow titanium railroad, thank fuck that was there, or else I'd really have no options.
I mean, to give someone the bare minimum and tell them they should be grateful for it is kind of...
They should be grateful for it, because somebody had to fucking work their ass off to make that empty titanium railroad. Right, someone had to work for that. It doesn't just exist in nature. You should be grateful for that.
I don't think that's a good way to...
Well, without the bare minimum, you have nothing. Right, having the bare minimum, that's great. When the only alternative is less than the bare minimum. Like, boy, that sure sucks, doesn't it? That's life.
My point is that the bare minimum, the stuff that they are giving, is not the only option, or at least not for the person, but it's not the only thing they can do. It is incentivized by capitalism to cut corners, even when it may harm people.
Cutting corners does not harm people inherently. Right, if you make this hollow railroad, that is helping people. If people are choosing to go for that, then it's helping them. They'd be fucked without it.
And why be grateful when we can look to improve things? Like, if
then go ahead and improve them. Right, that's the great thing about capitalism. You can go out there and make a better railroad. And then, boy, you get all the fucking money. And you drive the other guy out of business. This is fantastic. I don't see the issue here.
Alternatively,
you steal everybody's money, and you stop people from doing any sort of innovation, and then nobody can have anything. You just get whatever the government fucking ordains for you. That's horrible.
Alternatively, the railroad company lobbies the government into decreasing their taxes on the railroad.
Oh yeah, decrease them, that's great. Decrease the taxes down to fucking zero, hopefully.
And then they lower the prices of their tickets.
Great.
And then competitive railroads go out of business because they can't afford to run it. Better is not more profitable. Not always.
What you're mentioning there is the government taxing competition out of existence. That's not a capitalism problem. That's a socialism problem.
No. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying people are going to buy the cheaper ticket.
Yeah. So the government is taxing the competition out of existence because nobody wants to buy the taxed ticket. Right? That's a socialism problem. That's not a capitalism problem.
That's a capitalist problem because the capitalist is causing the problem. They're
No.
into doing
That's a socialist problem because you have the socialist central planner of the state who is deciding which businesses should stay in business or not. That is central planning. That's a socialism problem, not a capitalism problem. I'm against that.
The government is not shutting down this small business.
They are, indirectly. They are choosing which businesses they're going to tax, they're going to rob from, and which ones they aren't. That's evil. They should not be robbing businesses. The government should not exist.
I think we're getting off topic. I don't mean to cut you off there, but we should probably this is in part my fault. I think we should just stay on the topic of whether or not socialism is possible, because right now we're getting more into the nitty gritty of criticizing established governments.
I mean, I have my syllogism I gave you. Without private direction of factors, they can't be traded. If factors can't be traded, there can be no factor prices. If there are no factor prices, then economic calculation is impossible. Do you disagree with any step of this syllogism?
In its context, let me rephrase. In a capitalist society, this is a fair set of logical conclusions to draw.
So it's not fair when the factor of production can't be traded. Like, how does that break the syllogism?
Sorry. Wait.
Like, which line of this syllogism assumes a capitalist society? Which line assumes that?
Oh. Because you can use things other than, again, like, you can use other things than prices to make a calculation.
Okay, which things can you use other than prices to make economic calculation possible?
I gave you the example of the calculations based on scarcity, demand, and the department's want for those things.
Right, and a department's want for a certain thing does not economic calculation make. Right? I might want something a whole bunch. That does not imply that you can perform economic calculation there. You know?
But okay, so I think you're getting like stuck on the fact that economic calculation in the context provided by this syllogism is not the deciding factor for whether or not a government can effectively allocate resources.
How can you economize sans economic calculation?
With, like I said, again, scarcity and demand calculations.
What does it look like for me to perform a scarcity demand calculation?
We're just cycling back around. I already talked about this earlier on.
Right, because every time you go on some massive long ramble, where at some point you say include some sort of term where it's like, and then they decide on this thing, but is that in deciding on that thing which I'm asking for? And you sandwich it between an entire ramble. So let's just get down to the actual deciding of it. I am a socialist central planner. I have Railroad A versus Railroad B. How do I make the decision which one to choose?
How much steel do I have? How much engineers do I have?
You have 5 steel and 12 engineers.
And how much steel is required to make the long route versus the short route?
I don't fucking know. 5 steel for the long route, 4 for the short route.
Are there any other things that need the steel?
I don't know.
Well, I mean, that's kind of important, because if nothing else needs the steel...
I mean, like, you know, pots and pans, they need steel, I reckon. Cars, they also probably need steel. Aviation, that probably needs steel. Do you want me to keep going on? Because basically everything needs steel.
Alright. Great. So they ask for steel for what they need.
Okay.
The railway...
Do they get the steel?
The people in charge of making the railway ask for steel, or they tell how much they need the steel, or tell how much steel they need.
How is it that they say how much they need the steel? How do they say how much? How do they do that part? They say, I really, really, really need the steel, or as opposed to, I really, really need the steel. Like, how many wheelies do they add on there?
they'll express the necessity of the steel relative to the thing that they're applying it for. They say we need steel because it provides a reasonable proportion of structural integrity to relative scarcity. And in the context of constructing a railroad, these factors are important for the construction process.
No, because structural integrity is the same whether you go around the mountain or through the mountain. Right? It's the same structural integrity. The question is, how do you allocate those resources? Do you need more engineering or more steel?
Well, then let me rephrase then. We really need engineers for something else because this is a more difficult task.
But then I'm the railroad commissar, so I say, no, but we also need fucking engineers. I say we need them to go through the mountain.
You don't need to use a slur.
My apologies.
It's fine. But what was I going to say? Sorry, I just completely lost my train of thought. I'm so
sorry. Ew.
I'm so sorry. I'm just... Okay, I just want to say, I'm not trying to distract from the point. I just completely lost my train of thought. So it is in the best interest of the collective to make a reasonable request for something, and then they discuss what a fair division of the things they need is. If they need more engineers for this thing, and there's an alternative way to build around, there's an alternative to using more engineers for this thing, then they will just choose the outside. They will choose
right. But then they choose more steel. Engineers. And then all the industries who are needing steel are saying, what the fuck, bro? We need that steel.
That's another thing you take into consideration.
But how do you decide between them?
I feel like, okay, you see all the people, all the things that need the steel, all the things that need the engineering. If there is an alternative way to do it, you take that into consideration. If there is an alternative resource to use to do it, you take that into consideration. If the resource is completely necessary, if you need this one specific thing for this one specific reason, and nothing else will fit the bill, then you take that into consideration. And in the end, there will always be a degree of arbitrarity to the decision. But
there's not if you have a capitalist mode production. There isn't in a market. It's not arbitrary.
Rather than letting the market decide, the consumers and the people decide which or what they want more, what they want, or what they think, or what the people directly think is the best thing to do. Because the market isn't always right.
But what people want to do, what people vote on, cannot tend towards truth, is the point. Whereas the market does.
But what exactly, what proof do you have that the decision of professionals in engineering and theoretical predictions of the outcomes of events? What about their decision making does not skew towards the truth or the best use of resources? Why does
because they can't do profit loss calculations.
I see why the market, but they don't need profit loss.
Yes, calculations. They do. Just considering, hey, all these people need these different things for different things, right? That doesn't tell them what to do. None of that tells them what to do. Like, this engineer brain doesn't have access to how things should be done. It doesn't have access to the most value productive uses of different resources. All the engineer can say is, well, this line of production will have different effects and yada yada yada, blah 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 blah. But you can't say which one is best, given the economy.
But again, they don't need the economy. They decide based on the information. But I'm giving all these reasons why they don't.
They need a common unit of account is the fundamental problem here. They need a common unit of account. Right? They need to be able to say, hey, line A has, problems because it's less value productive than line B. It's less effective. It uses resources improperly compared to line B. Prices give you this information because you make a loss. Right? When you have a central planning system, you don't get this information. You just have to guess. You're groping in the dark.
But why? What necessitates, or what is the what proves, or what makes it the only truth that they can't do that? Why is that impossible?
Because without private property and the factors of production, they can't be traded. Factors can't be traded. There are no factor prices. And without factor prices, there is no economic calculation. Right? Economic calculation is the method that you use to determine the most value productive use of a given factor production. That's how you do it.
Capitalism. In capitalism.
Yeah, in capitalism and in socialism. That's how you do it. But you can't do it in socialism. Whoops.
In socialism, there is no private property.
Mm-hmm. So it's all arbitrary.
And so I'm proposing other ways to logically conclude the best use of resources. Like, you don't know that.
I do know that.
And you haven't proved that either.
I have proved that.
You're comparing a socialist system which is not operating by the same principles that allow.
What principles is operating upon differently? You said it isn't operating upon the same principles. What are the different principles?
In capitalism, there is the concept of profit. In capitalism, there is private property. That does not exist in socialism. So they don't have to worry about profit or private property.
Does the syllogism that I gave you,
how to best allocate these resources?
Does the syllogism I gave you assume that there's such a thing as profit? Does it assume that?
Private property implies the existence of profit.
Does it assume that there's such a thing as private property? The answer is no. It's saying, hey, let's imagine private property is not respected in the factors of production. Let's imagine that there is no private direction of the factors of production. Well, this means that they can't be traded. But if they can't be traded, then there are no factor prices. If there are no factor prices, then there cannot be any economic calculation. Right? It doesn't assume that we have a capitalist system and let's see what happens. It says, well, what if we have a socialist system? What does this imply? So it's assuming the complete opposite thing that you say it's assuming.
So this syllogism says that if there are no factor prices, economic calculation is impossible.
Mm-hmm.
And to you, that means that because economic calculation is impossible, socialism is also impossible.
More accurately, a socialist economy is impossible. So you can have a socialist society. You can have a society where all of the factors are directed by a single will, but you can't have any economization. Right? They're not economizing there. They don't have an economy.
So why does that make it? Well, okay, so what do you mean by impossible then? What is impossible, and how is it impossible?
Economic calculation is impossible, so they can't economize anything. They cannot tend themselves towards the most value productive use of any given resource. They can't do this.
I don't. Okay. You're saying that they can't determine the most value productive use of a resource according to economic calculation. That is true.
No. They because they don't have access to economic calculation, they can't tend towards the most value productive use of any given resource. It's not according to economic calculation. Right, that doesn't make any sense. It's because they don't have any method of economic calculation that they can't do this.
Well, they don't need economic calculation to determine
They do if they want to find the most
resources.
value productive, method of production. They do need economic calculation if they want to do that.
But they don't.
Okay, so they don't want that, then yeah, sure, you fucking live in your socialism with bare subsistence living, and yeah, you haven't solved the economic calculation problem.
It's not.
But
okay,
you're gonna live in bare subsistence. You don't have an economy.
Bare subsistence.
Okay, it is.
Bare subsistence. Access to food, shelter, education, and healthcare.
Oh, they don't have any education or anything. They have barely surviving. If you have a total socialist economy, you have nothing because you can't do any economic calculation. Like it's essentially death.
How is it? Okay, now I think you're really making wild conclusions here. I don't see how the existence of a social system necessitates any of those properties.
Because they can't have any economic calculation. Right? Without economic calculation, that means that they can't. It's it's a near complete destruction of the division of labor. Right? You can only, in a socialist society, you can only, at best, have a division of labor in consumers' goods. But that is very, very, very limited.
But division of labor
it's horrifically limited.
Division of labor can still exist, except it's not determined by capitalist market
Yeah, it's
forces.
completely
determined
warped. It's completely warped towards arbitrary and wrong lines of production. Everything is phenomenally inefficient, and it keeps being more and more inefficient as time goes on. It cannot adapt to anything. It is really death.
How is it inefficient? Why can't
because
it adapt?
They cannot perform economic calculation. This means they cannot perform social economization.
But I don't. You need to explain to me how that prevents them from allocating labor and resources and all of these things. Just because they can't do economic...
No, they can allocate those things. They can allocate labor and resources and all these things, but they do so arbitrarily, right? They're not allocating them where they should be, right? Because they can't figure out where they should be.
Okay, so they can't figure out where they should be. So there is a in the infinite possibilities of universes, there is technically one where they do happen to make, by chance, all of the correct decisions that allows a sustainable economy.
Sure, but they're not economizing.
Yes, okay. So so this I just want to clarify that what I'm saying is not going to be like a haha, gotcha, therefore, because 1 out of a million universes it is possible, therefore I win. That's not the point I'm making. What I'm saying is that because it is possible, there are other ways to determine the allocation of resources without profit loss calculations and the economic calculation.
What other ways?
Other ways to do it.
Why does the fact that it's possible to accidentally stumble yourself into a correct line of production imply that there must be some other way to figure out that correct line? Right, I don't see how that follows.
Because something is possible, that means that there are steps that people can take to reach it. there are logical
Right,
steps.
right. But how do they find those steps is the question. How do you find them, aside from economic calculation?
Like I said over and over and over again, by basing it not off of profit and in private property and capital, but by basing it off of a democratic system that takes into account
This democratic system does
scarcity.
nothing to solve the problem, as I've explained. Right, just having people vote on what they want. That, you have a committee which decides we're going to have more camels than horses, and we're going to have more railroads than roads. This is nothing. It does not solve the problem, fundamentally.
I mean, I guess it's true there's a possibility the committee will make a bunch of stupid decisions. But
no, not even that they will make stupid decisions. It's that when they make a bad decision, they couldn't figure out that they made a bad decision. There is no method for them to find out when they've made a mistake. It's impossible because they don't have any feedback mechanism.
But if they've made a mistake and they don't realize it, and they can't see the mistake evidencing itself at all,
No, there would be no evidence for the mistake. There would be no evidence for that being a mistake.
Then
right?
No repercussions are felt.
It would just have, well, there would be bad effects, but there would be no way to determine that this is worse than the alternative. Because there is no way to determine that this is a less efficient allocation of resources.
Well, but that's just not true. They could
It
see
is
that,
true.
okay, we have these options, and we're going to choose this, and we'll see how it goes. And then if they see things go wrong,
how do they see things going wrong? Right.
Thing.
Let's stop it there. Let's pause it there. How do they see things going wrong?
You're choosing between giving the steel to the railroad and the airplane, or let's say the railroad and the rocket, and they choose to give it to the rocket. And all of a sudden, people are having trouble getting to different places for their families on holidays.
No. Not all of a sudden. Because we're assuming that they were already having troubles getting from A to B. There is no way to get between these two places yet. So we're deciding, should we have a rocket to get there or a railroad to get there?
No.
So we have a rocket to get there. So then suddenly everybody is more able to get there than they were before.
I'm not talking about the rocket being used as a way to get there. I meant it. This is my fault. I meant it as a completely separate, like allocation of resources. It has nothing to do with transporting people. Just like it could literally just be
okay, right. So it's a different thing then. But then still, before they were complaining about not being able to get to B, after they're also complaining about being able to get to B. What has changed? How do you get a signal that you've made a mistake here?
Because things didn't change.
But things must have changed. Right, because before you didn't have a rocket, now you do have a rocket. So whatever the rocket was being used for, suddenly that has a benefit. Right? Maybe you wanted to get on the moon. So then suddenly you have a victory in some random area. So how do you figure out that was a mistake?
But the people are having trouble getting from place to place. So the people
who gives a shit about the people? Right? Who cares? How does that imply a mistake?
Because first of all, giving shit about the people is the entire point of a socialist.
But how does it imply that you've made a mistake? Because they were already pissed off that they couldn't get from A to B. Right? They were already pissed off about this. How does it imply that you made a mistake, given that they're still pissed off about it? How do you nail that mistake down to building the rocket?
It's a problem that needed to be solved. They could have used the resources in an effort to solve that problem, but they didn't, and the problem
They could have used it for a million other different things as well. How does this imply that they made a mistake? Maybe they didn't. Maybe the rocket was the best use of the resources. How do they figure this out?
It depends on what the the goal is going into the decision-making process. If the goal was to, make a rocket going to the moon, and they went in with that as the goal, then, sure enough, they didn't make a mistake. They made the right decision because they got the rocket to the moon. But if they go in and the effort is to help people get from point A to point B, then they failed. And the people
right. But then if their goal was to get from people from point A to point B, and then they failed at the goal of getting people from point C to point D, right? There is an opportunity cost in every allocation you make. There is always this. Whenever you choose to put resources in some line, you are taking away from other lines. Right? This is unavoidable because resources are scarce. We don't have infinite resources.
And the people, based on whether or not they benefit from it, or whether or not we see benefits for something versus detriments in another area, people will vote and decide on different uses in the future, on if there could have been a better decision.
How would they decide that? How would they figure it out? That a given line of production, maybe there were 72 milling machines sent to the rice factories when there only should have been 72 milling machines. How the hell could a fucking voter figure that out? How could they figure that out?
Because there are no machines for textile manufacturing.
Okay, so they have to take in the information. Every single voter has to take in the information of the entire fucking economy.
No.
Take it all in, and then vote on every single issue which pertains to the entire economy. This seems so fucking insane to me. That you would say this is possible.
No, they vote for people that propose different solutions to the problem.
Okay, but then it's still going to be a fucking single bill.
It's not a direct democracy. It's not a direct democracy. People aren't voting on every single decision. It's not.
Okay, but then the president has to do this.
Of 100 million people.
Whoever the president is that they vote upon, he has to do it.
It doesn't need to be president.
Or whatever fucking 12 presidents they vote on. However many you choose, they're going to have to do this.
Yeah. And?
It's impossible. They can't do it. What are they doing there? They're deciding, well, I think textiles need fucking machines more than car manufacturers. How do they make that choice? How do they do that?
The people say,
makes no sense.
We probably need this amount of stuff for our textile manufacturing. And these other people say, we also need
the textile manufacturers say, we need infinity machines. The car manufacturers say, we also need infinity machines. How do you choose between these two?
Okay, I'm gonna ignore that and say, what if the textile people instead
How about don't ignore it?
Well, if the government has infinite resources, or
they don't actually. They don't have infinite resources, but they say we want that much. We want infinity machines. So give us infinity machines. That's how much we want machines.
But there is no. This is not a plausible scenario, and it doesn't even demonstrate.
How is it not plausible?
The point of what you're trying to say.
Because your scenario was your government was set up such that people just in these different industries, they say how many of a given thing they want. They don't have to actually pay for these things. So they just say how many they want. So they maybe say, I want infinity of this thing. And that's how much they want it. And that goes into the big calculator, and it calculates that they need a bunch of them. So how do you decide between them?
I don't think this is just like, can we not this is okay. I'm maybe I'm being closed-minded, but I'm struggling to engage with the analogy having them requesting infinite resources, because it doesn't make sense.
Your system was set up such that the individual industries, they request a certain number of resources.
Yes, and therefore it is.
So what if they request infinity resources? What if I am running the car industry, and I say I request infinity steel?
then
That's how
you'll
much steel I
likely-
request. I request an infinite amount of it.
You will likely be relieved from your position. So someone
Why?
more reasonable,
How would you figure out that I should be relieved?
because you're asking for infinite resources.
What if I ask for 1 billion tons of steel?
They have to substantiate their requirement. We say,
Right, so
we need
everybody
1 billion
wants a
tons of steel
car.
to make
Everybody
10
loves... So I substantiate it as such. Everybody likes cars. Steel is a great material for making cars with. And I can give you a bunch of fucking chemists behind me who say that, yeah, steel's great. A bunch of engineers saying, yeah, steel's a great material for making cars out of. So I need 1 billion tons of steel to make 1 billion cars.
Why would
Can you
they-
give me 1 billion tons?
This is just not. There's several things wrong with this. One, they have no reason to request 1 billion tons of steel because it
No, I do, because I want to be
hurt.
having the impressive quotas. I like having a bunch of steel, right, under my control. Why would I request a bunch of? Why do I request little steel? Because then you're going to be like, this industry is unimportant if I keep requesting small amounts of stuff, right? If I'm not having a big production, then I'm unimportant. So I'm incentivized to be requesting a bunch of materials, right? Because then I'm the big industry. So I move up in my career. That is a big incentive for me to over-request.
The car manufacturer is not going into the request saying, I need steel. They're saying, I need steel to make cars. We want to make, I don't know, 20,000 cars. And to make 20,000 cars, we need this amount of steel.
Why would I say I want to make
cars.
20,000 cars? Why wouldn't I say I want to make 1 trillion cars? How would you figure out that that's incorrect?
Because that's stupid.
How would you figure out that it's stupid? How would you figure that out?
How many people do you have in the country? Do you have 1 trillion people in the country?
Maybe they all want a bunch of cars. How would you figure out that it's wrong? Because maybe we make 1 trillion pasta noodles.
Because
everybody wants multiple noodles of pasta. Right?
Because
how would you figure out that I'm wrong?
Because then they make 1 trillion cars and 99 sextillion or 99 billion of them are unused by people.
Okay, so if only there was some sort of system to where if you make a bunch of a thing and it goes unused, then you make a loss. Some sort of a loss, to where it shows you, hey, I've made a wrong estimation here. If there was some sort of system which did that, eh?
You are putting this in the extreme, and it's just not.
Putting it in the extreme,
logical.
it demonstrates the extremities of it. It demonstrates how absurd socialism is. Because we can apply this to capitalism, right? We can apply this. Maybe I'm a capitalist who wants to make 1 trillion cars. I would start on this line of production. I would start making these 1 trillion cars, and quickly I run out of money, and I can't do it anymore. Whoops, I made a mistake here. I've lost all my money, and now I'm out of business, right?
So the government, the people that allocate the resources will not look at a ridiculous request like that.
Why not? Why wouldn't they look at this? Why would they? How would they analyze this request and determine it's ridiculous? What if I said 500,000? What if I said 500,000? How would they determine whether or not this is ridiculous?
How many cars do they need? How many cars do
I'm saying I need 500,000 cars. That's what I'm saying. That's all the information they get.
But that's
how would they determine it's ridiculous?
But that wouldn't be all the information they get. It's not that you're.
Okay, what other information could they use?
Do people need cars? Is there a
yes,
lot of
people always need cars.
To get from point.
People always need cars. So I'm asking for 500,000 cars worth of materials. How could they determine that this is ridiculous or not?
Is there a crisis of people not having transportation?
A bunch of people don't have cars. I don't have a car right now, for instance. A bunch of people don't have cars. A lot of people would like cars. So how can you determine whether my request is legitimate or not?
Okay, so you think this person wants to make cars to solve the problem. They want to make a lot of cars. But this other department thinks well, we can save a lot of resources and solve the problem by making public transportation, by making buses and trains. Now, the government will look at this and say, well, it's a lot more reasonable to try to solve this problem by giving less resources.
How would they do this?
Less resources.
How would they figure out that it's a lot more reasonable to use public transportation? How would they do that? Because you said they would do that. How would they do it?
They take into consideration the fact that we would be using a lot more resources for this thing than this other thing. We are also taking into consideration the fact that
maybe a lot more people want
public
cars
transportation
than want public transportation, though. How can they take into consideration both of these things? How are they doing this? If only there was some sort of way they could do a profit-loss calculation or something. That sure would solve it.
You're just... Because the people are not illogical. The people, I mean, okay, this is... You are under the assumption that people tend towards dumb decisions, or are more likely to make...
I'm under the assumption that people need feedback in order to figure out when they're making wrong decisions. If they have no feedback to when they are choosing some line of production, that it's the wrong line of production, they couldn't choose the right line of production. In a capitalist society, when you have entrepreneurs who are investing their money in a given line of production, if they lose money, they're eventually, if they're a bad entrepreneur, they're going to drop out of entrepreneurship. Right, because they're going to keep losing money, and they will not be able to be an entrepreneur anymore.
So can I say something? In this scenario, they would see the effects of a poor decision in the fact that they have a lot of cars, and they no longer have enough steel for other things.
But how do you know that was wrong? Right?
Because
maybe you need those cars, but maybe those other things were less important than cars. How do you figure that out?
Because it's the people vote and they decide.
So you have a lot of camels and very few horses.
And maybe people wanted more one thing than the other. So they vote for people that say, we're going to solve this problem by doing this.
It doesn't solve the problem, though.
We're going to make...
That's fundamentally the problem.
But
it does not solve the problem.
You're saying it. I'm giving you examples of how to solve the problem. I'm giving you examples of how they make the decisions to solve the problem, how they can recognize if they've made a problem, and you're just saying...
No, you haven't given these examples. I've shot down every single one of these. I've shot down every single one. I've shot them all down.
But you haven't.
I have.
Going back to the hypothetical situation where they give, because apparently that's the thing they can do, 1 trillion tons of steel to the car manufacturers. They give all this steel to the cars, and now they have not as much steel for other things.
Yeah, how do they figure out that that's a wrong allocation?
An airplane, because they don't have enough steel to make airplanes.
No matter what, they're going to have a limited number of steel for other things. They're not going to have enough steel to make infinity airplanes. No matter what amount of steel they allocate towards cars, they are going to limit the amount of steel they can allocate towards airplanes. Right, no matter what. They're by allocating resources in one area, you're taking away from other areas. This is the fundamental point here.
And so they make reasonable decisions when allocating...
Well, how do you make a reasonable decision, is the point. How do you do
take
this?
into consideration the factors, the things, the problems that will be solved by putting
Just
more
take
steel
into
one thing
consideration.
than another.
You keep saying this. Just take it into consideration. Just decide it, right? But that, how do you take it into consideration? How do you decide it? How do you do these things?
Putting more steel into making a train to allow people to get to their jobs is going to help people get to their jobs. It's not, I mean, people, I suppose it's possible that people refuse to use the train or something, but when you put, when anyone puts anything, when anyone funds or puts, or buys stocks for a company, they believe that this, or when they put money into a specific program or whatever, they do it because that program shows promise to do the thing that it is supposed to do. And if it doesn't do the thing that it's supposed to do, then in the form of capitalism, it exists in the loss of money. In socialism, it exists in the fact that the problem is not solved and the resources that could have been used elsewhere aren't. It's not, it's really not that all that complicated, because it's not, information is not stifled. Information is readily accessible. They're able to make these decisions easily. They're able to take, I mean, you say take into consideration, because I don't, I'm making a nebulous statement because I don't feel like going into explicit detail all the particulars of a socialist government, because I'm not able to create a governmental system of allocating resources right on the spot. And I'm telling you the principles of systems that can be constructed, or the principles of systems that can be constructed to do these things that would solve these problems. Just because I can't point to a specific system, a specific formula or calculation or program that will do all of these, or committee that will accurately make all these decisions right now, does not mean that it is not possible. Because frankly, it is. And it's not ridiculous to think about, because people already do that in capitalism. I mean, again, the only difference is the way that the failure is demonstrated. People gather investing committees. They make decisions on where to put money into to make the most profit. And if they don't make profit from something, then they don't. Then it's recognized as a failure. And so I hate to cut this short, because there are a couple more things I wanted to say, but I do have to go now. I have to be somewhere in 20 minutes, and the drive is 10. So it was a pleasure being on the stream and being able to debate with you about this topic. And thank you for having me. And I'm sorry to cut this short so abruptly.
No worries. Have fun in your drive, I suppose. I'll see you later.
Bye.
Yeah, I was about to cut off the streaming myself, because I really need to take a piss. And it wasn't going anywhere. But I would say, in terms of the, I suppose I'll say this. There won't be any more videos this week, probably. I know I've been kind of cranking them out recently, but this one's going to be a longer one. I'm doing a video on Andor, that Star Wars show, because I think it has a lot to say about anarchist praxis. I'm basically doing a video where it's like anatomy of the state disguised as an Andor sort of Star Wars video essay. I'm kind of looking forward to it. I like what I have so far, but it's very difficult to get the words onto the page because it's not something that I'm familiar with. Yeah, you guys will see that soon. And I'll end stream now. Boop.